Greetings, my name is Stephen Cook, and I'm here to give a presentation today on care coordination and the right of self-determination. This is a presentation I've given several times before, but I've tailored for this particular presentation. Now, care coordination has to do with the providing of services or resources to needy individuals, and this in order to affect positive change in their lives. We want to make a difference. But as a case manager, I've been working in the field for over 18 years. I'm currently a lead case manager with Meals on Wheels, Inc. of Tarrant County. And as somebody who works in the field, I always have to be mindful about a client's right of self-determination. That is their right to say no to services. And that is the subject that we're going to deal with here, and how these two interact with each other and the tension that sometimes we feel and have to live with as case managers. I'm going to show several pictures throughout this presentation, and I will also present two case studies. Now, these two case studies did not turn out as well as I had hoped in trying to connect services or resources to these particular clients. And most of our interactions with clients do turn out much better, some more than others. But I cherry-picked these two because they represent sort of the extreme end of clients that we're dealing with, who either accept very few resources or reject resources altogether. And so these two case studies will hopefully demonstrate the point as we work through this particular presentation. Now, what is it that I want to communicate to you? What is it that I would like for you to take away from this presentation? Well, it's basically that the right of self-determination is a federally protected right in which a person of sound mind has the right to determine how they will live and what care they will accept. As professional case managers, or we might say anybody in the professional community, even medical professionals, as professional case managers, we care about our clients and seek to connect them with services and resources that will help keep them in their home. However, though we may have multiple resources available, we must respect the client's right of self-determination and not try to force services on them. Here's a little visual I created to hopefully communicate this a little better. In the house on the left, we have resources and services. On the house on the right, we have reception of benefits. And in between, we have what I call the pathway of volition. A person's right of self-determination determines whether or not they accept or reject what resources or services are available. Now, some people have negative volition. They say no to resources and services, and we must honor that. We really prefer people have positive volition and that they accept those resources or services, but we can never impose them upon them. We must always respect, again, their right of self-determination. Now, I'm not neutral. I certainly have a bias. I have an agenda. I care, and I want to help them. I want to try to get them as much resources or services that I can possibly provide to them because I want their life to be better. So I come with an agenda, and I come with certain things in my tool bag, things that help me to connect them with those resources or services. But again, this visual helps communicate this idea concerning the pathway of volition. I'm going to show you a few pictures of homes that we go into and what we encounter as case managers out in the community. And these are pictures that I've taken for the most part. Some of our clients, as they begin to decline physically and or cognitively, their ability to care for themselves or their environment diminishes. And so this is what we run into. Now, when we go out and we assess a client, we assess them first and foremost nutritionally. We're trying to make sure that they're getting good nutrition. What happens is when a client begins to decline cognitively or physically, they tend to gravitate towards what's easy, but what's easy isn't always healthy. It's cookies and crackers and chips and those sorts of things. And so what we want to do is we want to provide a good nutritional meal that's made fresh each day and delivered to them at their home, ready to eat. But when we come in, we also want to assess them medically, financially, environmentally, socially. Who's visiting you? How often do they visit? Are they a help to you? Do we need to bring in somebody else? Because even though our first concern is nutrition, we're thinking holistically. We're trying to meet their needs, whatever that happens to be. So when we come in, we're assessing them on multiple levels. But again, this is part of what we run into, and this helps us to be able to determine their need and to try to connect them with, again, services or resources. It can be a little overwhelming sometimes when you walk in and you see the hoarding situations. This was an interesting situation that I walked into about 7 months ago, when I went out to see this client. She called and she said that she didn't have any food. Now, our priority is always to make sure that they have food. So if we get a call where somebody says that they don't have food, we literally drop everything and we are out to the client's home within 1 hour. We have to address the emergency situation first. And once we've settled that, then we can begin to look at other areas of need. Prior to getting out to the client's home, she had told me that her home was very dirty and not to pay attention to that. I've gotten that before. So sometimes clients are a little embarrassed by their environment, so they'll tell you that. This particular client told me that she had a raccoon that was coming into her home and was the cause of all of the damage in her home. I'd never heard that before, but you see and hear all sorts of things sometimes when you're working out in the field. And so I got out there and was visiting with her. And of course, we're going through and I'm asking, can I take pictures so that we can maybe submit this for repairs? So she consents and I'm working through this. And this was a living room shot on the left. And then on the right, you see the kitchen area. And she said that there was a hole in her wall which was the point of entry for the raccoon. Well, I looked at the home inside and outside. I could not find any point of entry. I could not find any hole. And I began to think that she had manufactured the story because she was a little embarrassed and she was just trying to explain away her environment. And we get that. I wanted to connect her with other services in the community, and ultimately she refused. She wound up just accepting Meals on Wheels, and this is one of multiple stories that we run into, or situations that we run into. And of course, when we walk into these sorts of situations, we're impacted by this. We are not impervious to what we see and what we take in. Sometimes when we leave a client's home, it's important for us to call a coworker, maybe a supervisor, and debrief for a little bit. Maybe even run by a nearby store and maybe get a snack or something, just kind of disconnect for a little bit because, again, we can be impacted by this. So what is care coordination? Care coordination is the assessing of a client's needs and providing available resources and/or services necessary to improve their health and to keep them safely in their home for as long as possible. Many of our clients who are elderly are really towards the end of life, and we realize that they're not going to go back to a place where they're working, at least the vast majority of them are not. And so we're really there to help them as they transition towards end of life. Some of our clients are even on hospice care. But we want to try to improve the quality of their life and to keep them safely in their home for as long as possible. Resources and/or services are based on health and safety. If a client calls and says, I have pink walls and I would like them painted white, we cannot help with that. That's not a health and safety issue. If they have holes in their roof, if they do not have electricity, they do not have running water, if they do not have food to eat, that's a different story. We will expedite services to them because, again, that's predicated on health and safety. And much of what we do is investigative work as we assess before we offer equipment or services. So what is care coordination? Care coordination is both a science and an art. It is both a science and an art. As a science, we employ tools that help us assess the client's nutritional, physical, and mental health. For example, we use the AD8 assessment, the Alzheimer Dementia 8-question assessment, which helps us to determine the client's cognitive state. We also use a nutritional assessment, which helps us to determine their nutritional level, where they are. Are they getting adequate nutrition? Are they eating on a regular basis? We also have the C&E, which is the consumer needs evaluation, and this helps us to understand their ADLs and their IADLs. We have a food security survey, which asks them questions about whether or not they have sufficient funds to purchase food, or whether they're having to cut back on meals because they don't have adequate funds. So we have these tools that we employ in our assessing a client. As an art, we utilize our tools within the context of a relationship with the client. And that relationship is fluid, ever-changing, and influenced by numerous variables. It's always within the context of a relationship that we are most effective. Let me give you an example. I had a client some years ago, probably about 10 or 11 years ago, and she came onto Meals on Wheels. She came to us via MHMR, and the client originally asked for a female case manager because she came out of a relationship in which a male had abused her for years, physically and mentally. And she was dealing with some PTSD as a result of the trauma. And so I worked with one of my coworkers who agreed to be her case manager. And after about 6 months, the MHMR social worker asked if we could switch the client over to where I would be her case manager. And we were sending out male volunteers to the home, and the client was receiving meals from some kindly men. And so she was having a little bit of exposure to men, but the Meals on Wheels social worker thought that a little exposure therapy in a greater way might be more helpful to the client. And so she asked if I would be willing to come out and meet with her. So I went out to the client's home with my female coworker and the MHMR social worker and sat in the home for about 30 minutes. During that time, I was exceptionally kind, soft-spoken, gentle, very relaxed. And I was very much trying to demonstrate to her that I was safe. And I think that's what a lot of people ask if they feel like they've been traumatized in some way. I think a lot of people, they may not articulate it to themselves in this way, but when they meet someone, one of the first questions they ask is, "Are you safe?" They may ask other questions afterwards, like, "Are you competent, caring," and so on. But a lot of people want to know that they're safe. And so sometimes we have to go the extra mile to try to communicate that. After about 30 minutes, the client agreed to let me be her caseworker. And so I would go out and visit with her at least once every 3 months. And so when I would go out to visit with her for a regular recertification visit, she would open the door about 8 or 10 inches and would talk to me there at the door. That was her comfort zone, her safe space, and I'm going to honor that. So we would talk, and she would answer questions, and I would try to keep it as pleasant an experience as possible. After about 9 months of being her caseworker, I went out to visit with her one day. And when she answered the door, she opened the door wider than normal. And I could tell that she had been crying. She was in distress. As I looked past her shoulder into her living room, I could see towels and blankets and stuff out on the floor. Apparently, there was a water leak in the apartment above her, and it flooded down into her apartment. And she was not only distressed over certain items that were damaged in her home, but also the fact that some male maintenance men were going to come in and have to spend the day tearing up her carpet and possibly replacing it. And this was a huge disruption to her. In the flow of the discussion, she had mentioned one of the things that was upsetting to her was that her microwave had been damaged. And I told her, I said, well, it's interesting because we carry brand new microwaves and we give them away to our clients who are in need. I said, if you like, I can bring you a brand new microwave tomorrow morning. We stood there in her doorway and had a blinking contest for a few seconds. And she said, "You would do that for me?" And I said, "Yes." The very next morning, I drove out to her place with new microwaves still in box. I come to her door. She opens the door. She lets me in. I go into the kitchen. I unplug her old microwave that had been damaged, set it aside, put the new one up on the counter, plug it in, set the clock, show her how to use it. And as I'm about to leave, she turns to me and with tears in her eyes, she says, "Thank you." And we had a turning point there, because what happened in her mind wasn't that I was just safe. I was for her. I was on her side. And I had demonstrated that in a very tangible way. And at that point, I had earned her trust. And so when I came out to visit with her on future occasions, she would let me in. And of course, I capitalized on that. And I continued to provide other services. I got her assistance with utilities and some other things. And so you try to build on that, but it's in the rapport, it's in the flow of the relationship that we are able to affect real change. And so that's an example of how important that is. And so again, we utilize our tools, and really we might say services and resources, again, within the context of a relationship. And of course, that's always fluid. It's ever changing. It's like the Chinese proverb that says you never step in the same river twice, because it's constantly changing. And that's true when we walk into a home. Now, the overall objective is to provide the quality, the overall objective is to improve the quality of the client's life and to keep them safely in their home. Again, building relationships is paramount to a successful case manager or anybody who works in the field, as it's, again, in the rapport that we learn about needs and how to connect the client to available resources. And the story I just told demonstrates that. The life of a case manager can be very rewarding and enjoyable as we seek to affect change in the lives of disabled and senior persons living in the community. Mental health is very, very important, and maintaining that is very important for case managers, and again, for anybody who works in the field, social workers, medical professionals, and so on. As case managers, we enjoy going to our home after a day of troubling visits, but sadly, the clients don't get to leave their troubles. And sometimes we wonder if we've done enough to help them. It's always that nagging concern that sometimes lingers in the back of our mind. And we sometimes get frustrated by the reality that we're very limited in our resources. And in that sense, we cannot fix every problem or alleviate every concern. We could tell numerous stories, such as the World War II veteran who had large holes in his roof and buckets on the floor to catch the water when it rained, or the woman who fed her dogs while she continually lost weight due to not eating, or the man who suffered from Alzheimer's and refused to wear clothes while wandering around his front yard, or the man whose house burned down and had been living in his garage for months, or the rats in the mobile home that scurried through the mounds of trash that had been collecting for years. The work is not for everyone. Case managers are caring and strong, but we are not impervious to the pressures of the job. And over time, it can chip away at the joyful disposition that often sustains us. So maintaining good mental health is paramount. It's one of those things where if we do not take care of ourselves, we are of no use to those that we're trying to serve, whether that's family, friends, or people who are clients in the community. Effective care provides tailored support to the client for as long as the need exists. Ideally, this support will stabilize or improve client health, keep them safe in their home, reduce hospitalizations, and improve the overall quality of life. What are some of the challenges that we run into? Well, care coordinators face the daunting challenge of identifying resources that are scattered and ever-changing. When I started working for Meals on Wheels, Inc. of Tarrant County back in 2004, there were roughly about 300 social agencies in the county. Now in 2023, a little over 18 years later, there are upwards of 750 social agencies in the county. So again, there are hundreds of community resources in Tarrant County which offer services to the elderly, children, and disabled. But out of that pool of agencies, only a certain percentage will be relevant to our clients, because some offer services to elderly, some with children, some to the disabled, some are income specific, some are zip code specific. And so out of those resources, again, only a pool of those, only out of that pool of agencies, only a certain percentage will be relevant to our clients. And sometimes those services are available only within a specific time frame or region. Because what happens is, and you know what happens, an agency gets funding, they provide a new service or resource, and that lasts for a year or two or three, then the funding dries up, and all of a sudden the service is no longer available, and then we must go on the hunt to find that service somewhere else. So these are some of the challenges that we face. Now, some of the barriers to providing care, what do we run into? Well, first is ignorance, not knowing what resources are available. I know as a case manager, I'm constantly talking to my coworkers. I'm talking to people in other agencies. I'm making phone calls. I'm surfing the web, trying to chase down resources, sending emails, just trying to stay up to date on all of the agencies or resources that are available. Volition is a big one, which is really the issue pertaining to this presentation, and that is the right of self-determination. A client refuses services and says no. Change, a client's situation is constantly changing, and that's an issue that we deal with as well. Dementia, that the client cannot comprehend, and that's a big issue. I had cared for my mom for the last few years of her life, and her dementia became quite advanced. Fortunately, I was able to secure POA for her, both medical and durable power of attorney, prior to her dementia really coming on. And so I was able to have that in place. But eventually got to the point to where there were days she didn't know who I was. I would show up at her door and she'd look at me and she'd say, "Are you my son or my grandson?" And I'd say, "Pick one, Mom. Who do you like the most? I'll be that one." You know, because you're picking battles sometimes when you're trying to care for people. But this is true with clients with dementia. And so, you know, a client cannot comprehend or not being able to have a rational discussion. That can be a barrier to providing care for the client. Language can be another barrier. Now, some of our clients, the language issue is that they speak a foreign language, Russian or Spanish or Vietnamese. We have a large Vietnamese community here in Tarrant County. And language and dementia really go together. They're really complementary to each other, like a hand in a glove. And, you know, normally we employ language every day as a reliable vehicle for the expression of ideas. In fact, right now, we are operating on the assumption that language serves as a reliable vehicle for the expression of ideas. And so as I formulate thoughts in my mind, I'm able to verbalize that. And as I'm verbalizing it, it is being recorded by my microphone above my head and by the camera in front of me. And it is being recorded digitally. It will be transmitted and it will be played, and people will be able to hear what I'm saying and see what's on the screen in front of them. And because we have a shared bank of vocabulary, we are able to do this thing called communication. And so I'm able to verbalize certain ideas or to write them down, and that communication is then transmitted. And again, because we have a shared bank of vocabulary and concepts, we're able to do this thing called communication. Well, when you're dealing with a client that has dementia, that all breaks down, because rational words only work with rational minds. And a client who suffers from dementia is not altogether rational. So the normal means that we employ of being able to try to communicate with somebody, again, breaks down. I found that when I was dealing with my mom, I had to deal with her more on an emotional level than a cognitive level, because I could say something to her and one, she wouldn't get it, or two, 5 minutes later, she wouldn't even remember it. And so it was just when I interacted with her, I had to be a detective in many other ways. And I had to search out things. I had to monitor her mail. I had to monitor her bills. I had to talk with neighbors. Again, you're doing a lot of investigative work. But my interactions with her had more to do with my tone, body posture, delivery. Because of her dementia, she was operating more on an emotional level than a cognitive level. And so I had to try to maintain my relationship with her and try to figure things out, because if she gets upset, if I keep pressing her on something, she's going to get upset over the whole matter. And of course, then you're not making any headway. You're actually losing ground. But this is true for our clients as well. When we get out there and we try to interact with them, if they're dealing with dementia and they don't know what you're talking about, or they can't remember 5 minutes later, well, again, that's a barrier to providing care. And language itself can be a barrier if you're not able to communicate, whether that's due to a cognitive decline, such as somebody with dementia, or if it's somebody who speaks a foreign language in which you need a translator to make that happen. Trust is another big issue. In fact, really, you could do, we're looking at volition, the right of self-determination, but really, when it comes to care coordination, you could really do a presentation on all 8 of these. You could do care coordination and change, care coordination and dementia, care coordination and language, care coordination and trust. I mean, all of these are really kind of standalone issues. I'm including them here in the list. Although this presentation focuses primarily on the right of self-determination, you could think about all of these as a barrier to providing care. But trust is a big issue. A client does not feel safe to reveal a problem. And just like the story I told a little bit ago about the client whose home flooded. I didn't like that happened to her, but that afforded me an opportunity to be able to step in and to touch her life in a way that impacted her for the better. And it was a very tangible expression that earned her trust. And of course, then you want to build on that along the way. Another barrier to providing care is limited resources, that is, having insufficient funds to pay for services. We run into this all the time. Sometimes an unsafe environment is a barrier to providing care. Sometimes we go into neighborhoods where there's high crime. And I can tell you there's been times when I pulled into a neighborhood and looked around and then just drove on. And then came back an hour later, and when it looked safe, fine. Mean dogs, that can be an issue. And I've been bitten twice. I had a little Chihuahua one time bite me through the netting on my shoe. A little booger got me. He drew blood on one of my toes. And anyway, he tagged me pretty good. I had another time I was bitten by a German Shepherd, and he got me on my thigh, and he didn't break blood. He didn't break skin so as to produce blood, but there was a nice little set of ring marks where his teeth got me top and bottom, and you could see it. He got me pretty good. Bugs can be another issue when we go into homes. A client who's a hoarder, again, another issue. These can be barriers to providing care. And sometimes we feel like we're multitasking. We're spinning a lot of plates. And so we can feel a little overwhelmed at times in the work that we do. So let's look at case study number 1. A few years back, I had a client who received Meals on Wheels services. The client was a 72-year-old woman who lived alone. She was on the Meals on Wheels program for approximately 15 months. The client's health had declined over the first 8 months that she was on the program, and her weight dropped to about 80 pounds. She became very frail and ambulated with the use of a walker. In addition, the client could not care for her home, and the trash began to build up. Fruit flies and other bugs became common. The client began to experience incontinence problems and could not always make it to the bathroom in time. In fact, her bathroom door was about 8 feet from her bed, and she was so frail that when she would get up and go to the bathroom, sometimes she couldn't make it and would have an issue with incontinence, and afterwards would just crawl back into bed. We began to get complaints from volunteers, and our delivery people are volunteers who deliver the meals Monday through Friday. We have a different person on each day of the week. But we began to get complaints from volunteers who were coming into the home and stepping over piles of trash, among other things, to get to the client. The client became so weak that she could not peel the cellophane plastic off the top of the meal container. She was that frail. So the volunteers would do it for her. They would also open her carton of milk and put eating utensils next to the tray. The client's declining health and emaciated condition made it difficult for the volunteers to witness. And that's absolutely true. Now, we were getting calls really from multiple volunteers, and there's another tension that we deal with, because if we get a call from a volunteer, they will describe the situation. We'll go out and visit it and confirm that's what's going on. We will then make referrals to multiple agencies, and we're trying to get the ball rolling, and the client may refuse all of those services, so his or her condition may continue to decline. In the meantime, the volunteers are seeing a declining situation. They're getting frustrated because they're like, well, I keep calling, but nobody's doing anything. But the reality is we don't have a magic wand. It's not like we can just wave a wand and make it happen. That's not how the system works. And then we deal with issues of confidentiality, because if they call back and they want an update on the client, we can't divulge confidential information. So we have to be very mindful of that. So it's a very delicate balance that we have to maintain between the client, the volunteers, and anybody else that we may partner with. So again, they would see the client's declining health, the emaciated condition. This made it difficult for the volunteers to witness. And over a period of 2 months, we wound up losing a volunteer because he could not stand to see the client in her deteriorating condition. Now, I advocated for the client. I have to advocate for the client. I mean, I'm concerned about the volunteer, but at this point, the client is my main concern. And so I have to advocate for the client. And I tried to keep the volunteer coming because I knew that his departure might further exacerbate the client's situation, resulting in fewer services and people checking on her, because the meal delivery Monday through Friday wasn't just a meal, it was a well check. And to have one person plucked out of that delivery schedule would mean that there was one day where she was not getting services. So you're dealing with that. It's a delicate balance. Now, the volunteer was a wonderful man with a big heart. In fact, a lot of what he said and how he communicated resonated with me. So the volunteer was a wonderful man with a big heart, but his sensitivity to the client's situation was overwhelming him. And I greatly sympathized with him. And he would tell me that when he left, basically he could not get the image of her out of his mind. And he would go home and he would think about her into the day and into the week until he saw her the following week. And of course, sometimes when you leave an environment, sometimes the smell of the environment gets trapped in the fabric of your clothing. So you have that to carry with you as well. But he just kept seeing this and seeing her decline, and would make a report, and then nothing would happen. And another week he would see decline. And again, it was just overwhelming to him. And again, I greatly sympathized with him. And though I pleaded with the volunteer, the situation was really more than he could handle. And we all have a break point. I don't care who you are. Everybody has a break point. I have a break point. You have a break point. And he was at his break point. And he just could not tolerate the situation anymore. However, there was another volunteer, a former nurse, retired nurse of 30 years, who stepped in and covered for the volunteer who stepped out, thus preserving services. It was really a godsend because she was not only not bothered by what she saw when she went in there, but she would put the client last on her delivery for the day. And then she would stay over for another 15 or 20 minutes, would clean up, take out the trash, wash a few dishes lightly, do some light cleaning, and leave the place better than she found it. Again, absolutely wonderful. And it's nice when it works out that way. And a lot of these people, they go about their work and you don't know their name, and they are the invisible heroes. Excuse me. They're the invisible heroes who serve quietly in the community. Sorry. All of our volunteers are stars. We have a saying, but some stars shine brighter than others. I don't know who said that, but it's a good saying. Over a period of several months, I'd made 3 APS referrals, that is to Adult Protective Services. On one occasion, a medical professional came out to the home of the client, and she was declared mentally competent by a medical professional. Though APS offered services, the client refused. And though I had multiple resources available to help the client, She continually refused. However, she continued to accept Meals on Wheels meals. So here's another little diagram that I put together to help communicate what's going on here. I'm connected with Meals on Wheels, so we're providing services, but I offered her to connect her with Adult Protective Services, who could help get her set up with utilities and other services. I tried to connect her with Community Action Partners to help with utilities as well. I tried to connect her with United Way. I tried to connect her with the Department of Aging and Disability Services, who would come in and provide an in-home caregiver attendant who would do light house cleaning, laundry, help with bathing, those sorts of things. What happened was she said no, 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 yes, no, and she rejected all services except Meals on Wheels. Now, I am not neutral. I am biased. I have an agenda, and I'm there to try to help her. And I very much want to connect her with services and resources. I want her life to be better. And I would tell her, I would say, okay, you're telling me no today. But guess what? I'm going to be back out here in 2 weeks or a month. And guess what we're going to talk about? That's right. We're going to talk about those services again because I care about you and because I want you to get this help and there are resources available. She would say, I know, I know. I would say, okay, just know this is what's going to happen, because I realize that a no today might be a yes tomorrow. And I've encountered that. In fact, we'll look at a story here in a little bit where we saw some of this back and forth. And so if I catch somebody at the right time and I can get them to say yes, then I can open that door and I can get those services to them. I have to be very diplomatic in how I go about it. I have to be very sensitive, very mindful to the client, always respecting their right of self-determination, that they have the right to say no. Now, the client had a daughter who lived about 2 miles away, but did not want anything to do with her mother. In fact, when I called the daughter, she dropped a few of her favorite expletives and told me she didn't want anything to do with her mother. I don't know the backstory behind what went down with mom and daughter. At that point, I just knew that that was a closed door, so I had to leave that alone. The client eventually passed away in her home, having refused all services except for Meals on Wheels. Now, again, this is sort of the extreme end of cases that we deal with. Most of the clients that we serve, we are able to connect them with other resources. But I bring this up because this sort of sets the boundary of how we interact with the client and the fact that a client may say no to services or resources. And again, we have to honor that. So in all this, I had to maintain diplomacy with the client, trying to get her services, but not pushing so hard that it drove her away. Though I did not agree with her choices, I had to respect her right of self-determination. Sir Isaac Newton once said, diplomacy is the art of making points without making enemies, to which I would agree. So let's talk about the right of self-determination as a federal right, even argued before the Supreme Court. Federal law gives every adult person of sound mind the right to self-determination regarding their personal and healthcare decisions. In a United States Supreme Court decision by Schlöndorff versus Society of New York Hospital, it was determined, quote, every human being of adult years and sound mind has a right to determine what shall be done with his own body, end quote. In a journal article in the AMA Journal of Ethics in October 2017, there was an article that was published titled Capacity Determinations and Elder Self-Neglect. This was co-authored by Joshua M. Baruth, MD, PhD, and Maria I. Lapid. I think I'm saying that correctly, MD. And so the article, again, is titled Capacity Determinations and Elder Self-Neglect. And they say, quote, There are no specific guidelines for clinicians about how best to respond to self-neglecting patients who retain medical decision-making capacity, but who are unable to adequately care for themselves, end quote. And that nails it, because there are no clear guidelines and or no specific guidelines. And as people, we're forced to wrestle with this issue. And I think it's good that we wrestle with it. I think it's good that we do. It can be challenging. But I agree with the right of self-determination. I think that is a correct view to have. And I'm glad that the federal government argues for the right of self-determination, because I adhere to that. I may not always like the choices that other people make, but I think it's part of what makes us human beings. But there is that tension that you have to deal with there. I found this quote really just jumped off the page at me, in which it says, quote, "When elderly patients retain medical decision-making capacity in the absence of advanced dementia or psychiatric disease, but cannot sufficiently care for themselves, physicians are often faced with ethically challenging decisions." And I bolded that because that just screamed off the page at me. And I thought, yes, that's what we all deal with. We struggle with those ethically challenging decisions, and they are a challenge. Going on with the quote here, specifically, physicians are asked to balance the ethical principles of beneficence, that is, acting in the best interest of the patient, and non-malfeasance, avoiding harm, while respecting a patient's right to self-determination or autonomy, end quote. I love that. And that just so spoke to me when I read that. And why is self-determination important? Why is it important? One, the ability to make choices is to a large degree what gives meaning and value to our lives. That ability to make choices, that right of self-determination, is part of what it means to be a human being. Self-determination means we have the right to exercise our volition freely, without being bullied or restrained by others. You see, we are not under a tyrannical system. Now, freedom comes with its own problems, and this is part of what this is dealing with here. It's not completely free, but nonetheless, self-determination means that we have the right to exercise our volition freely, again, without being bullied or restrained by others. And number three, self-determination also means we have the right to live as we please, at least according to the law, and to accept or refuse the resources or services offered by others. Acknowledging a person's right of self-determination also means accepting the consequences of their choices, which can include refusal of resources or services from others, like my client who rejected all the services that were available to her except for us, making poor financial decisions, making poor nutritional choices. If they want to eat chocolate and cupcakes every day for the rest of their life, that's their choice. And again, we may not approve of that. And again, we may speak to that as diplomatically as we can, because again, we're not neutral, and that's fine. And I even tell my clients, I'm not neutral. I'm here for you, and I want to help you. So I let them know. But again, it means respecting their right to make poor nutritional choices, their right to miss a doctor's appointment. That is choosing not to go, poor planning, poor time management, etc., or living in a dirty, cluttered, or hoarded home. That is their right. Now, this can be very challenging. It can be very challenging. And I'm speaking about my mom, as I mentioned earlier. You know, she was dealing with end-of-life issues with dementia, but making poor financial decisions years before her dementia began to manifest itself. My mom was a poor financial planner. And by the end of her life, she was in poverty. She was living on $930 a month. And I had to try to help her connect with services to keep her in an apartment, subsidized housing, to get her a caregiver and so on. But she was rational at the time. Well, my uncle, her brother, passed away, and mom came into a small amount of money to the tune of about $50,000. My mom, being the poor financial planner that she was, I knew she would start making some bad choices. Me not being neutral, I would say, hey, Mom, why don't we invest this? Why don't we put some aside? Why don't we buy a few things that'll improve the quality of your life? And she said, no, no, no. And she liked to go up to the casino. And within 1 month, she had spent the entire $50,000. She was broke, literally, within 30 days. 20,000 of it she gambled away. I assume she enjoyed herself. The other 30,000 wound up being handed off to family who surprisingly just came out of the woodwork. And though I did not approve at all regarding her financial decisions at the time, she was of sound mind, and she had that right to do that. Now, being in relationship with her, I tried to reason with her, and I tried to get her to make some good decisions. But in the end, she made poor financial decisions. And we can talk about the right of self-determination and agree with it in concept and principle, and even with regard to our clients. But it really touches home when we're talking about loved ones, whether we're talking about sometimes parents as well, especially if we are a caregiver for them. But again, it means respecting their right even to make bad choices. So the reality is that resources do not always equal benefits. A person may have multiple resources available to them, but may never benefit from those resources because they fail to accept them. So again, we come back to that pathway of volition, that a person may have negative volition or positive volition, and that really determines whether or not they will reject or accept resources or services that are available to them. The right of self-determination assumes that one has the cognitive clarity necessary to make rational choices for oneself and to act with regard to one's own self-interests or preferences. As a person begins to decline cognitively, of course, they may lose that decision-making ability. There are some situations where seniors may be deemed incapable of making their own decisions, such as when they are suffering from advanced dementia or other cognitive impairments. In those cases, legal guardians or other designated decision makers may need to make decisions on the senior's behalf, taking into account the senior's prior wishes and best interests. And my mom, when she was in a clear state of mind, made it very clear to me that she did not want to be on end-of-life support, for example. And she allowed me to be able to secure a durable and medical POA when she was in a clear state of mind. But she communicated very clearly that she did not want to be on any end-of-life support. And we'd had that discussion many times. And in February 2021, she wound up going to the hospital and wound up going into a coma. She had COVID and pneumonia, and she was 85 and very frail. And anyway, when I got down there on Tuesday, February 16th, 2021, at about 6:30 in the evening, got in there, and she was in a coma, had been for a couple of days. And the doctor just said, look, she's being kept alive on a BiPAP machine. She's not going to survive that. If that machine comes off, she's not going to make it. And he was very honest. And I just told him, I said, well, let's take it off. Let's not keep her on that. I knew what her wishes were. And I said, let's take that off. So a nurse came in and administered some pain medication, took her off the BiPAP machine, and my wife and I sat on either side of her bed and held her hand and stroked her hair. And for the next 30 minutes, we watched her heart rate go down, her breathing became more and more shallow, until eventually she took that final breath. And it was a very peaceful passing. And I was glad to have been there with her and for her, and to honor her requests at that time. So it's one of those things where, again, we can talk about these things, but when it really hits home is when it touches us on a very personal level. Of course, I'm dealing with this on a perspective as a professional who works in the community. So again, in those cases where they have advanced dementia or cognitive impairments, legal guardians or other designated decision makers may need to make decisions on the senior's behalf, taking into account the senior's prior wishes and best interests. Now, as case managers, we don't have that decision-making capability. That falls to family or to guardians who have to go through a legal process and courts and so on to secure that. And we work with guardianship services to try to help clients get the care that they need. As case managers, we are not neutral and are free to influence those around us. But influence is different than control. Influence means we seek to persuade others to make good choices, whereas control takes their decision-making ability away. We do not want to control. We want to influence. We want to respect their right of self-determination. As an involved participant, my job is not to diagnose a client's mental capacity. That's determined by a qualified medical professional. My job is to refer clients to Adult Protective Services for screening. If a medical professional determines a client has mental capacity to make decisions concerning their self-care, then I must operate with what I have and seek to provide the best care that I can with what resources are available to me. In the second case study, I've set up some lights here, a red light, a yellow light, and a green light. And you'll be able, I changed the lights here as we work through this study, and you'll see how we shift in the study, how we move from a red light to a yellow light to a green light, back to a yellow light. And you'll see where the client vacillates and how we have to try to work diplomatically through a situation with him. So the client is a 68-year-old man who lives alone. In autumn 2017, his left leg was amputated just below the knee. Trash began to build up in his home, and he had difficulty keeping it clean. I was not his original or primary case manager. She had gone out to visit with him and saw this and began to try to work with him to get services to help clean up his home because it was not navigable. I mean, you couldn't walk through there. And in the picture on the right, you could see where he was on his couch and he would just lay there and he would throw stuff behind the couch and around the couch. And it was pretty bad. But I was a support case manager who came in to try to help secure services for him. And these were pictures that I took when I got out there with his consent so that we might submit these to Adult Protective Services so they could see what they were walking into and might be able to help facilitate to connect him with services. Here you see a picture behind the couch where he's just throwing stuff over the couch. And then as it kind of moves around into the kitchen area, the entryway into the kitchen. So it was a pretty difficult situation to look at. And if you look in the picture on the left, you can see back into the bedroom where it even, drifts on into the bedroom as well. His Meals on Wheels case manager offered cleaning services several times. Now, originally he said no, but we realized that a no today might be a yes tomorrow. So we are persistent. We've learned to be patient. It's part of our one of the tools in our tool bag is that patience and that persistence. So she kept offering services, but he refused. Well, after several visits, he finally accepted the offer for help and was ready to let someone clean his home. The case manager called APS, who went out to assess the situation. The APS worker began the process of obtaining 3 estimates before cleaning began. During this time, the client vacillated concerning services, and we encouraged him to let APS help. So what started out as a green light shifts to a yellow light to where he's starting to back out. So again, he vacillated concerning services, and we had to encourage him to let APS help. Now, my first contact with the client occurred a few days after APS went to his home to assess his situation and offer help. And when I called the client, when I answered his message, the client identified, when I called the client and identified myself, his first comment was, "So you're the blankety blank who ratted me out." Well, I didn't quite know how to take his comment. Was he joking? Was he half serious? I kind of think he was half serious. But for some reason, he didn't like APS coming in, even though we told him that. And anyway, his comment to me kind of threw me off, and it kind of set me on my heels. But you play poker, you measure your tone, and you try to be as diplomatic as you can. And so I began to talk with him through it. Well, really what happened was even though the other case manager was the one who made the call to APS, during that conversation, I took responsibility. I said, yeah, that was me. And I did it because I did not want the other case manager viewed negatively in his sight. So I took responsibility for it in order that her relationship with him might not be jeopardized. Because again, you're trying to maintain that trust. And if he's willing to assume me as some bad person in his mind, I'm sure, okay, I'll go with that as long as we can keep things intact. My phone conversation with him lasted 43 minutes. And when I hung up on our office phones, we have a little clock on there. It tells us how long the call went, and 43 minutes had gone by. And his concerns had been addressed. I was able to address them with him, and the house cleaning was still in process. So we moved back into a green light situation. A few days later, I went to visit the client and to encourage him to stay the course. And I visited with him for nearly 30 minutes again to try to encourage him. Let's keep going with this. However, after I left him that day, I got back to the office and I had a phone message in which he said he had someone, a friend, who might do the work for free. And I felt like he was trying to back out of services. So I immediately called him and suggested, hey, why don't we let the professional cleaning company do the major cleaning and let his friend help with keeping the house clean? He agreed. So again, we're back to being a green light. 2 days later, 2 days later, there was another message with a concern about misusing government money to clean his home. He said he feels guilty taking government money when it could be used for someone more needy. He said he anticipates dying within a few years and feels it would be a waste of time to use those resources on him. I assured him there's no shortage of money and that others are not being deprived of services if he receives help. I suggested we stay the course and get his home cleaned. Again, he agreed. Finally, the client felt overwhelmed with all the attention and involvement in his life and eventually called and canceled services altogether. He just canceled Meals on Wheels and everything. Now, as case managers, when me and the other case manager got together and discussed the matter, we were not sure if his refusal of services was predicated on pride, if we had pushed too hard to get him to agree to help, or if it was a little bit of both. I tend to think it was his pride, but you always have to reflect and you always have to think, could I have done it better? Could I have done it differently? And you look at that as honestly as you can, and you take stock in all that you said, and you kind of work it, you do the mental scenarios, you kind of walk it through. And anyway, we had discussions about it, and it's just one of those things where you dust yourself off, you pick up and you move on. And so anyway, this particular case study turned out to where, again, we had to respect his right of self-determination. We didn't like it, but we had to respect it. So as case managers, we are not neutral and are free to influence those around us. But influence is different than control. Influence means we seek to persuade others to make good choices, always respecting their humanity, whereas control takes their decision-making ability away, and we don't want to do that. So suggestions for helping a client accept help from other agencies, and there's going to be a little duplication between this slide and the next one. But these are some of the things that we employ when we go out. First, begin with empathy. Acknowledge any fears or concerns they have. Sometimes when we go out to visit with a client, it can be a 10-minute visit. Sometimes it can be an hour-long visit. And we have to listen to them. We have to interact with them and talk with them, but we really have to listen and acknowledge any fears or concerns that they have. When talking with them, we want to use positive language. We want to emphasize the benefits of accepting help rather than the damage of not. I mean, sometimes it's tempted to go that way, but we always want to try to use positive language, emphasizing the benefits of accepting help. Give them options. Provide them options which allow them a choice in their care. You might put 3 or 4 agencies in front of them. And again, you're not neutral. You might say, look, I've worked with this one. They're really good, but all 3 of these have equal ratings. Whichever one you want to select, the choice is yours. Again, trying to employ language that recognizes their decision-making ability, their right of self-determination. Offer support. Provide reassurance. That's one of the things we do. We want to reassure them that hey, look, throughout the process, that you're not going through this difficult situation alone, that we're here to help, that we're here to come alongside you and to provide support. And we have to partner with others. We have to partner with other case managers, social workers, professionals in the community, whoever. We have to try to come together to offer support and to reassure them that, again, they're not alone. Some of our clients, have lived in their homes for many years, and what was once their palace is now their prison. And maybe they have family that's a distance away or has passed away, is no longer around, or just simply doesn't care. Unfortunately, you do run into that. And sometimes we may be the only support that they have. And, we have to do everything we can. We have to advocate for them. So what's in my tool bag? First, there's knowledge of what resources are available, and that's a shifting thing, and staying on top of that is very, very important. Empathy, concern, acknowledging their fears and concerns. Support, letting them know they're not alone and that you're there to help them. Encouragement. Listen, it's so easy to become discouraged by life and by circumstances and declining health. And I'll walk into a home. I remember being in a home not too long ago where a man who was a military veteran, and you look at the picture on the wall, and I mean, he looked sharp in his military uniform. I mean, he was clean and crisp, and man, he looked sharp. But then to look at him now and to see his environment in such a state of disarray and decline, you realize that what you see here is not the way that man was. And you want to try to elevate them back to that place of dignity where they feel good about their environment, but coming alongside them in an environment or situation in life that can be very discouraging. You want to come along and you want to be an encourager. You want to try to build them up, to edify them. It's interesting. I studied classical Greek and Koine Greek for 4 years in postgraduate school and graduate school. And the word to edify translates commonly the Greek word akoidome. I know I'm chasing a rabbit trail here, but the word akoidome is a compound word, oikos meaning house and dome meaning to build. And it's the idea of building up. It's the idea of structuring something. And so when I think of edifying somebody, when I think of encouraging them, I think of building them up. And this is a respect to them. This is a show of honor to them. And so we want to be that encouragement. We want to be that positive influence in their life. And we must be patient. We must be patient. Patience is a big one. Persist in your efforts to help them. Persist. And again, a no today may be a yes tomorrow. We have to be persistent. And, if we drop the ball on something, relapse isn't collapse. You get up, you dust yourself off, you lick your wounds, you move on. But you have to be patient with the client, with the individual, and you have to persist in your efforts to help them. Diplomacy, using language to help them overcome whatever psychological or emotional barriers they may be dealing with, but using language to help them without violating their right of self-determination. Diplomacy is very important, very important. And believe it or not, lastly, in my tool bag of resources is self-care. Self-care. Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we are absolutely no good to those that we are trying to help. Absolutely no good. And this means that we have to maintain professional distance, because if we get too close, it can cloud our thinking. And I need to be as sharp as I can be. I need to have the greatest amount of cognitive clarity that I can possibly have when I'm on the job, when I'm helping my client. I need all of my wits about me. And so maintaining that professional distance allows me to maintain that in a greater way. Getting good rest. You got to rest. You got to get good sleep. You have to play. You have to have good nutrition and good hydration. Oh my, that is so important. Exercise and socialization. These are all things that charge our batteries, that keep us performing optimally to the best of our ability. I was recently flying on a plane, and of course, they're walking through all the drills with the life vest and everything that they have. But they'll talk about how, if the cabin loses pressure, the little airbag comes down, the air drops down, and you have the little face mask that you put on. But they tell you, put it on yourself first before you put it on anybody else, because you have to be operational yourself before you can offer help to anybody else. And that's just good thinking. That's just good reason. It's true in our profession as well. When we are helping the most needy in the community, we must maintain good self-care. And I am a big proponent of good mental health. It is so important because you can go out into the community, and I've had it. I've walked into that home where you walk out the door and you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you go out and you see your first client, and you walk into something you never thought you'd see. And you walk in and you're overwhelmed by a situation, and you see things that are upsetting to you, but you have to play poker. You have to get through it. And I remember after getting through with a client and calling 911 or calling EMS or calling, whatever agency it happens to be, that I'm trying to coordinate services. And by the time I walk out of that client's home an hour later, my low battery light is blinking. I'm spent. And there's times where I've had to get on the phone and call a coworker or call my supervisor and just say, hey, I need to talk. I need some debriefing here. Or maybe I need to go down the street and take a 30-minute break at the park and get some sunshine and walk around. Or if it's even bad enough, I've even called it a day. It doesn't happen very often, but it has happened. But maintaining good self-care, that is so important, because your client, the person you care about in the community, needs you to be the best that you can be. Sorry, I get emotional over it. It's very important. So that is one of the things that's in my tool bag of resources. So I hope that this presentation has been helpful to you. In conclusion, we start every day with a heart and mind that wants to help the needy who cross our paths. We consider the work we do as ethically good, and we seek to utilize whatever resources or services are available to us. However, though we are not neutral, we must respect the client's right of self-determination and learn to live with the ethical tensions that this creates. Thank you very much. I hope this presentation has been helpful to you and that you have benefited from it. And I wish you a blessed day.